They appear when the night is at its darkest. Small figures standing on doorsteps, in parking lots, or at the edge of the road. Their eyes, black as coal, reveal nothing. No emotion, no soul. But behind those empty voids lies something far more sinister. Tom was a man who lived by routine. Every night after his late shift, he drove the same lonely road home. It was a night like any other when Tom first encountered them. The moon was hidden behind clouds, and a dense fog clung to the pavement, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. It was then, through the thick mist, that he saw them. Two small figures standing eerily still by the side of the road. They appeared almost out of nowhere, their pale faces barely visible in the dim light of his car's headlights. Tom's instincts told him to keep driving, but something compelled him to stop. As he rolled down his window, he could see them more clearly now. Two children, a boy and a girl, both looking no older than 10. They were dressed strangely, in outdated clothes that looked out of place in the modern world. The boy said, his voice flat and emotionless,
"Please, sir, let us in. We need to use your phone."
Tom's hand hovered over the door lock. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, an overwhelming sense of dread washing over him. Something was wrong, very wrong. It wasn't just the odd request or the children's peculiar appearance. It was their eyes, black, bottomless, and unnaturally void of any light. The boy stepped closer, his face almost touching the glass. He repeated, more insistent this time,
"Please, sir, we can't come in unless you invite us."
Tom felt a chill run down his spine. His instincts screamed at him to get away, and with a shaking hand he slowly rolled up the window, refusing to let them in. As Tom drove off, he glanced in his rearview mirror. The children hadn't moved. They just stood there, their black eyes following his car until he disappeared into the fog. That night, Tom couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw their faces, those dark, empty eyes staring back at him. Days turned into weeks, but the memory wouldn't fade. It was as if those children had left a piece of their darkness behind in Tom's mind. He began to dread the drive home, avoiding that stretch of road altogether. But it didn't matter. They found him again, this time at his own front door. The knocking started late one night, soft at first, then growing louder, more insistent. Tom peered through the peephole, and there they were, the same two children standing on his doorstep, their faces expressionless.
"Please, sir, let us in."
Tom backed away from the door, his heart racing. He turned off all the lights, hoping they would go away. But the knocking persisted, growing louder, more desperate. Hours seemed to pass before it finally stopped. When Tom finally had the courage to look outside, they were gone. But the darkness they brought with them never left. From that night on, Tom was never the same. He quit his job, isolated himself from the world, and became a prisoner of his own fear. He knew they would come back, and when they did, he wouldn't have the strength to resist them again. But not all who walk the roads at night are children. Some, it seems, were never meant to be there at all. It was supposed to be a simple drive home. Jessica was exhausted from a long day at work, and the storm outside made the journey even more grueling. The rain came down in sheets, hammering against her windshield, and the road ahead was barely visible through the downpour. As she strained to see the road, her headlights caught a glimpse of something. A figure standing alone by the side of the road. It was a woman, drenched to the bone, with her arm outstretched, thumb pointing upwards in a silent plea for help. Jessica's first instinct was to keep driving. After all, picking up hitchhikers, especially on a night like this, was a risky move. But something about the woman's forlorn figure, the way she seemed to shiver in the cold, made Jessica slow down. Jessica pulled over, the car's wheels splashing in the growing puddles. The woman approached the passenger side, her face hidden beneath long, wet strands of hair. Jessica hesitated for a moment, a sense of unease creeping up her spine, but she unlocked the door, letting the woman in. The woman slid into the seat, her clothes soaked, leaving the seat wet. She didn't say a word, just nodded in thanks. As Jessica started driving again, the silence in the car was palpable, broken only by the rhythmic thump of the windshield wipers and the relentless patter of rain. Jessica tried to make conversation, asking the woman where she was headed, but the woman remained silent, staring straight ahead. Her presence was unsettling. Something about her felt off. Jessica noticed that despite the wet clothes, the woman's skin was almost unnaturally pale, her fingers long and thin, gripping the seat tightly. The rain grew heavier, and the road twisted and turned through the dark forest. Jessica could feel the tension building in her chest. Something wasn't right. The woman still hadn't spoken, hadn't moved since getting into the car. Jessica glanced at her again, and for a brief moment she thought she saw something beneath the woman's hair, a deep, dark bruise, or perhaps something worse. As they approached a sharp curve in the road, Jessica's anxiety peaked. She gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white. The woman suddenly spoke, her voice barely a whisper, yet it cut through the silence like a knife.
"Please, drop me off here."
Jessica's heart pounded as she pulled over, the car skidding slightly on the wet road. She didn't dare look at the woman again as she turned off the ignition. She didn't ask if the woman was sure or if she needed help. Jessica just wanted her out of the car. She finally turned to the passenger seat, ready to say something, anything. But the seat was empty. The door hadn't opened. There was no sign of movement. The seat was dry, as if no one had ever been there. Jessica's breath caught in her throat. She scanned the area, but there was no one in sight. Just the rain, the road, and the dark forest looming on either side. Panicked, Jessica started the car again and sped away, her heart racing. The road seemed endless, the rain relentless. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her, following her, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. She didn't look back, didn't slow down until she was miles away, the town lights finally coming into view. When Jessica finally reached her home, she sat in her driveway, hands trembling on the steering wheel. She couldn't explain what had just happened, couldn't rationalize it. All she knew was that something unnatural, had entered her car that night. And whatever it wasn't human. But some spirits aren't content with just finding their way home. Some seek far more than a simple ride. In the shadowed alleys of Japan, there exists a tale as old as it is terrifying. A tale of a woman whose beauty was stolen from her in the most horrific way. Now she wanders the streets at night, seeking a twisted form of validation, asking a question that seals the fate of those unfortunate enough to cross her path. Hiroshi was an ordinary man, walking home from work late one night. The streets were empty, and the air was thick with an unsettling stillness. As he turned a corner, he saw her, a woman standing alone under a streetlight, her face hidden beneath a mask. There was something about her that made Hiroshi uneasy, but he couldn't explain why. As he drew closer, the woman's head lifted slightly and she spoke with a soft, almost innocent tone.
"Am I beautiful?"
Without waiting for a response, the woman reached up and removed her mask. What Hiroshi saw made his blood run cold. Her mouth was grotesquely disfigured, a gaping wound running from ear to ear, creating a twisted, permanent smile. She stepped closer, her voice now laced with malice.
"How about now?"
The words hung in the air, a cruel mockery of the horror she had revealed. The woman's smile widened as she pulled a pair of sharp, gleaming scissors from her coat, the metal catching the dim light.
"Liar,"
she hissed as she lunged forward, the blades flashing in the night. No matter how fast Hiroshi ran, the footsteps behind him never faltered, always keeping pace, always just a few steps behind. The alleyways twisted and turned, leading him deeper into a labyrinth of darkness from which there was no escape. The woman's voice echoed in the darkness. Hiroshi turned into a narrow alley, only to find a dead end. He pressed himself against the cold, damp wall, his heart pounding in his chest. But it was too late. The woman appeared at the entrance, her silhouette framed by the flickering streetlight. Her scissors gleamed as she stepped forward, her twisted smile reflecting the fear in Hiroshi's eyes. Just as the woman closed in, scissors raised, Hiroshi's adrenaline surged, and he made a desperate dash past her, slipping through a narrow gap between buildings. The woman's sinister laugh echoed behind him, But he didn't stop. He ran until his lungs burned, until the alleyways blurred into a dizzying maze. Finally, he burst out onto a familiar street, his home in sight. Gasping for breath, he slammed the door behind him and collapsed onto the floor, every muscle trembling with exhaustion and fear. He was safe. For now. That night, Hiroshi fell into a fitful sleep, his mind replaying the nightmarish encounter over and over. But when he awoke, the sunlight streaming through the window, it all seemed distant, like a bad dream. He sighed with relief, his heart rate finally slowing. But as he stretched and reached for his phone, something caught his eye. A small, innocuous object lying on the bedside table. Hiroshi's blood ran cold. It was a surgical mask, identical to the one worn by the woman from the night before. His hand trembled as he reached out to touch it, his mind racing with the implications. But before his fingers could grasp the fabric, a faint, familiar voice whispered in his ear.
Am I beautiful?
These stories remind us that the world is full of darkness, hidden just beneath the surface of the ordinary. The next time you see a child by the road, pick up a hitchhiker, or encounter a stranger in the night, think twice. Urban legends might just be the echoes of something very real, lurking in the shadows, waiting to be believed. If these tales have sent a chill down your spine, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more horrifying stories from the darkest corners of our world. And remember, the night holds more than just shadows. It holds secrets.